So thank you all again for joining us for this Young Wildlife program. And this is really timely because we get a lot of calls this time of year about baby animals. What do I do? Oh no. So we hope that this will be very helpful for you and helping you to assess the situation if you do find a little critter anytime this spring or summer. So before we jump into young wildlife issues and solutions, we just want to give a little bit of information about us at the DEM. So we did drop a link in the chat for a quick video that Gabby and I put together that just explains how our mission at the Division of Fish and Wildlife and how we are funded. So we're primarily funded through the Wildlife and Sportfish Restoration Program, which is a fund that comes directly from our hunting licenses and the sale of an excise tax on firearms, ammunition, and archery equipment. So this is about 95% of our funding. So as such, we work a lot with hunters. We manage game species. We do a lot of different things, but a huge portion of that funding, which is a wonderful way that we can tap into this user pay system, is our management areas. So a lot of land has been purchased with that funding, and it not only gives folks a place to go hunting and fishing, but it protects a lot of wildlife habitat. So there's about 60,000 acres that have been protected in our management area system, and everything from deer and turkeys, which are game species that are able to be hunted, to dragonflies and salamanders, which are what we call non-game species, are still as important in the ecosystem. Everything that lives in those areas is going to benefit. So you can visit these areas, and Gabby's going to put an interactive map link in the chat. So if you've never been to a management area, you don't even know the first thing about them, where the heck are they? There are these green blobs all around the state. We've even got some way out on the East Bay, if you're tuning in from Tiverton, Little Compton, or Newport. But the majority of them are on the western border of the state. That's where most of our contiguous forest is. So these are really, really beautiful properties. There are some rules that apply, though, if you do visit them. So right now, we're in the month of May. I cannot believe it. It's May already. We are still in hunting season. So right now it is spring turkey season, and that means that you have to wear fluorescent orange when you visit the management areas. And this is to just provide visibility and a level of courtesy to the hunters that are out there, because the hunters do have to wear it as well as they're traveling to and from their blinds and their tree stands. So it's just an extra level of safety for folks to be able to see each other. And we have a fun video that we put together in case you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I should be wearing. Where should I be wearing it? We do have a fun video that we put together with our outreach and education explaining when you should be wearing orange, featuring our hunter education coordinator, Scott Travers, in his, we call it the Swamp Man suit. So basically, if you're visiting a management area anytime between September and May, you should be wearing 200 square inches of orange. That counts as a hat. I personally go for a vest just because hats sometimes annoy me. So at least the vest I can just throw over whatever I'm wearing. But you can go with a hat or a vest. The only time that you have to wear a hat and a vest is in the month of December. That's shotgun deer season. So you need 500 square inches. I put a picture of, this is my dog, Zinnia. She's been our spokes dog for orange and for outdoor recreation on management areas in many Facebook and Instagram posts. But you can see Zinnia is also wearing an orange vest. So this is very important to, now, I mean, I hike with my dog year round. I know a lot of folks get out there and hike, but especially during the September to May period, we really highly recommend that you put orange on your dog just as another level of courtesy for hunters. I also put a jingle bell on her, and she is leashed at all times. So you do have to leash your dogs on management areas, especially from March through September, because it is the nesting season for birds. So this, if you have a dog running around, all over the place, the dog's having a great time. But that could potentially disturb birds that are trying to build their nests. So we just ask that you leash your dogs on a management area. It can be 25 feet long. So when I take Zinnia out, she has plenty of space to kind of frolic and romp around with that 25 foot leash. And it just helps everybody kind of stay safe and out of each other's way. She was very excited to find this shed antler. As you can see, she's in mid-wag as she's walking. So we welcome dogs out there. We just ask that we all adhere to the dog walking etiquette in our management areas. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Gabby to talk about what is going on in nature right now.
All right, so spring has sprung. The grass is finally green. I look outside and I'm like, oh, finally. I feel like I've been waiting for color all year long. But we usually know, April showers bring May flowers. So we know about the weather during the different seasons. We know what plants are going to come up. We know in the fall, the leaves are going to fall off. Well, the same thing is true for wildlife and what they're doing. So they have seasonal fluctuations and seasonal habits as well. So kind of knowing what wildlife is doing during each time of the year can also be really fun to learn, and also really helpful when you're trying to figure out why you might be seeing another animal more often at a certain time, why a coyote might be out during the day at a certain time versus, at night other times. So it's really important to know these seasonal habits of wildlife. So if we click on the next slide, we can see that right now it's baby season. So this is when basically all animals have their babies. So many animals have their babies in the springtime because a lot of our large and medium-sized mammals will have their mating season in the wintertime. And so right about now, the young are being born, or they're getting just old enough to kind of emerge from their dens or hop out of their nests and start to learn how to fly. So that's why we see a lot of baby animals this time of year. And then in the spring, we also have birds and reptiles that are mating. So turtles are out crossing the road trying to get to their pools to mate and to nest, to lay eggs in the sandy soil adjacent to those wetlands and those upland areas. So lots of things are on the move out. The snakes are out basking in the sun. The turtles are out basking in the water. Lots of animals are out right now. And then in the summer, some animals begin to disperse or kind of spread out to go find new territory. And in the fall, even more will begin to spread out. So lots is going on during the year. And usually it's in these kind of chunks where we know winter is usually breeding season for most of our mammals. And then spring, usually the young are born, and then summer and fall, they're dispersing. So just knowing kind of what they're doing during each time of year is really helpful to us. So it wouldn't be odd if you were to see some animals out during the daytime. And I'll let Mary kind of talk about why we might see animals out during the daytime, especially this time of year.
Yeah, so we've got some coyote pups on a trail camera here. So this is, I included this picture. I mean, we could have gotten a bunch of pictures of baby animals, but part of what we have been doing over the past few years at Fish and Wildlife as part of a study to look at the distribution of black bears in the state, we've set up over 100 trail cameras all across the state, and they've kind of shifted them from the west side of the state to the east side of the state. And we've done this in collaboration with the URI Wildlife Genetics and Ecology Lab, which is really, really cool. So we've been able to, so we're trying to study the genetics of any bears that we are able to grab hair samples from through the whole other story, how we do that. Also, they help us with our bobcat project, the New England Cottontail project, and a trout project as well. So it's really awesome partnership that we have. But this is one of the many trail camera photos. I think there were over 200,000 that were captured in this study. A lot of very patient undergraduate students sorted all of these. But as you can see, these are coyote pups. They're out during the day. It's 9 o'clock in the morning, and they're hopping around. They're doing their thing. If you are a parent, you know that your kids never stop. Toddlers never stop, right? So these are the toddlers of the animal world. They are hungry. They are full of energy, and they need a lot of attention. So parent animals are forced to go out and find food at all hours of the day and night. So normally coyotes are, for the most part, nocturnal, or you may see them very early in the morning or at dusk. You probably won't see a coyote out maybe at noon or 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Might be kind of weird. But during this time of year and into the summer, it's fairly common to see them during the day because they are just so strung out trying to feed these hungry puppies. And that could be for any wildlife, any mammal in particular, and birds just never stop. They're back and forth all day with caterpillars. So that is just to give folks an idea, so that if you do see an animal that, like, it doesn't mean it has rabies because it's out during the day. I always like to give the analogy that, like, well, people, we're supposed to go to sleep at night, right? But how many of us stay up late? How many of us work overnight or go out and do different things? Like, our schedules are not super predictable, right? And that's the same thing for an animal too. So they're not by the book all the time. They can come out during the day. They're fully capable of it. When you're seeing animals that are acting strangely or that are acting aggressively and they're out during the day, that's something to worry about. But just a coyote or a fox or whatever passing through your yard, not really a concern. They're probably just looking for something to feed their hungry, demanding little critters. Okay. So that just on, moving forward, we, and Kristen, please feel free to chime in at this point as well at any time. But we'd like to kind of highlight some commonly kidnapped animals, because a lot of times what happens is folks will see baby animals out during the day. They see them unattended by parents. And what parents are doing is they're going out and trying to find food, both for themselves and to bring back to their young. So mom and dad are not necessarily always right next to those little babies. And wild babies are very capable of taking care of themselves and sitting on their own. And there are some times when we should be concerned and definitely call the clinic. But there are other times where the clinic gets called and they really didn't need to be called. And somebody ended up by scooping up that little animal and accidentally kidnapping it out of the wild. So two commonly kidnapped creatures include fledgling birds and fawns. So we'll talk about both of those separately. So this is a great comic. I love this artist, Bird and Moon Comics. Rosemary Moscow is the artist, and she has a lot of really great infographic type things about wildlife. She focuses solely on wildlife. They're awesome. If you find a baby songbird out of the nest, Rosemary's going to walk you through it. So is it visibly injured, or did a cat get at it? Okay, no. All right, let's go down the no. Well, let's do yes first. So yes, your cat got to it. It's visibly injured. So you definitely want to contact the Wildlife Rehabilitators Association. This is when they need help. No, cat didn't get it. So what does it look like? So if its eyes are not open yet, it's kind of fuzzy, but it's mostly kind of like a little pink blob. This is a hatchling. So they're very young. They've recently hatched out of the egg. If its eyes are open and it's got some fluff going on, some of that downy feathers going on, this is a nestling. So this little guy, he's alert and everything. Mom and dad are coming to feed him, and he's still pretty helpless though. If it's feathered and it's kind of awkward and it flutters around, this is a fledgling. So this is a fledgling right here. So you can see how his feathers are kind of growing in, but he's got some of that fluff still on him, and you can see on the tufted titmouse here too. See, he's got that little fluff that's kind of poking out, but he's mostly feathered. So that's a fledgling. So they're learning how to fly, and you may see them hopping around on the ground, and that's okay. Mom and dad will still come and feed them. We had one outside of the office. I think it was a little sparrow of some sort, and he was so cute. He was perched on a twig just next to the parking lot, and we're going, oh, look at him go! And the mom was coming back and forth with caterpillars and moths and things, coming to feed him. He was just stretching his little wings. Obviously, if it has many sharp teeth and a claw on its second toe, it is a dromaeosaur, so an extinct animal. So she inserts a little humor here. So let's keep going on the birds, though. If you can see the nest and you have a hatchling or a nestling, you can see the nest, you can just pick it up and put it back into the nest. And the parents are not going to smell you on the baby. This is not going to affect any of their care. It's not going to do anything wrong. So if you can see the nest, absolutely put it back in. But if you can't see the nest, you can make a little basket with some dried grass, and you can tie it to a tree in the area where you found the bird, because likely the nest is nearby. But birds are very good at camouflaging their nests, understandably, because they have to avoid predators. So if you can kind of create a little basket for the bird and make sure that it's nice and dry, then the parents will probably find it and tend to it. If you have a fledgling, now they're hopping around, they're fairly independent. If it's in immediate danger, like if it's in a driveway, a road, your cat is eyeing it. If kids are riding their bicycles nearby, it's an immediate danger, then you can just gently scoop it up and move it to a safer spot, maybe under a shrub or in your garden somewhere where it's not going to be harmed. If it's not an immediate danger, if it's just kind of in your flower bed or your vegetable garden, just leave it alone. So they're totally fine. You could probably stress the bird out more than you think, just by looming over it. Think about it, we look like a big predator, and that little baby bird thinks we're going to try to eat it. So just kind of leaving it alone, and mom and dad will take care of it. No problem. Okay. So let's talk about fawns. Now, this is one that I know that the clinic gets a lot of calls. We get a ton of calls. Our dear biologist every year is like, can you please do a post to talk about fawns? Alert everybody. So fawns are notorious for being left alone by mom, and they curl up in the grass, like in our first picture that we had on that very first slide that Gabby actually took that photo. They curl up super cute like this. All those little spots help them to camouflage. So they're very used to like saying, okay, mom's gone, and for me to lie low and I have to camouflage and be very quiet. So if you find a fawn that's all curled up like that, fine, time to leave it alone, right? If it's like in a road or, someplace where it's going to be harmed, you can call the rehab clinic and see if they can come and help you move it. So we really don't advise people to handle wildlife. Obviously, if it's like an emergency and the car is coming at it right now, so you should probably move it. You don't have time to call, but you can always call for advice. There are some instances though where people think that the animal is in distress or that it's been abandoned by the mother, and mom is just somewhere nearby. And she's not going to come over to the fawn while you're there, or even while you're watching, even after the fact. If you go inside your house and you're like still looking out, you're going out on the deck and you're looking, mama's going to wait a little bit of time because she doesn't want to draw attention to the location of her fawn, because she thinks that, oh, well, if you kind of walked by it, if you're a predator, you didn't see it, you didn't eat it. So I shouldn't go over there and draw extra attention to my baby. So sometimes you have to be a little patient and just kind of stand back and give them space and peace and quiet, and mom will come back and feed them. And she nurses them throughout the day, but she has to go get food too, so she can replenish her own energy. But the problem is that the clinic gets a lot is that the babies, and I pulled these directly from the Facebook page, from the rehab Facebook page, which we'll have a link to that at the end. We'll have all of our social media links at the end as well. If you'd like to follow them and see some cute baby animals and get some tips throughout the year, definitely follow them. But if you have a fawn here, so these little guys are obviously much older than this little one. So see, his ears are nice and straight. They look nice and round, and they look really perky. This is fine. This fawn is perfectly fine. It's being cared for by mom. This little guy, you can see his ears look kind of curled up. And that means that the fawn is in distress. Like it's either malnourished or dehydrated or whatnot. It hasn't been attended to. And that's when a fawn needs help. So that's when you should be calling the clinic. So it can kind of be a little nerve-wracking, like, does it need my help? Does it not need my help? For the most part, I would say, unless the little guy looks like this, and he looks really weak or he's visibly injured, then you're probably fine to just leave the fawn alone. And of course, you can always call and ask. There is one. Oh, go ahead, Gabby.
I can say I have, when I was doing my surveys, out in the field looking for different animals, I would walk around and I would come across fawns all the time, and they're curled up in these little balls and they don't even move, or they don't look at you. They stay really, really still. And you might think that it's not okay because it's so still and you're like, why isn't it reacting? Why is it all by itself? But they really are okay. And it's hard to be like, just leave this cute little baby animal all by itself in the woods. But really, mom is nearby and she will come back to check on it. And just like Mary said, if you're ever unsure in the situation, you can always call the wildlife clinic, and we'll give you that phone number too. And then they can advise you before you take any action.
Right. So we do have a way that you can indirectly help fawns and deer. We have a summer deer survey that is a community science opportunity that runs from August through September. So both of those months, keep an eye out on our social media page. We'll post the opportunity. You can do it right from your phone. You don't have to fill out any paperwork or anything. But basically, if you see a doe, a female deer, and a fawn, or multiple fawns, we'd love to know where they are. So this kind of gives us an idea of the recruitment or the number of fawns that are being born across the state. So it's obviously not a perfect science because we're not counting every single deer, but it's way better to have more eyes out there than just our deer biologist trying to drive around, count all the deer, right? So it really does help. And we had quite a few observations that came through last year. So definitely keep an eye out for that. That's a really cool way just to get involved. Very simple, and anybody can do it. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Gabby.
Great. So Mary talked a little bit about some wild babies that might accidentally be kidnapped unknowingly. And we also have calls about animals that can be orphaned. So some animals are orphaned a little bit more frequently, just because of their life history. So, for example, squirrels. So squirrels, a lot of times they'll fall out of the nest, and they are born in kind of springtime, and then they have a second breeding season, and they have more young in the late summer. And so right now, I know the clinic has already gotten in a lot of calls about baby squirrels that have fallen out of the nest. And then again, in the late summer, they'll get another round of baby squirrels calls coming in. So if you do find a squirrel and it's out of the nest and you can reach the nest to put it back in, you can do that. But if you aren't able to do that, can't find the nest, you can call the clinic and then they'll direct you to probably bring it in. And then the other reason why squirrels are orphaned frequently is because people in the springtime, they'll start to hear the squirrels running around in the attic. And so they'll be like, got to get those guys out of it. Got to get them out of my attic. And I completely agree. Like, I don't want squirrels chewing up my wires. But because it's the baby season for squirrels right now, then if you trap the mom out, then you might accidentally leave the babies inside. And that happens a lot. So if you close up those holes and while mom's outside, there could still be babies in your attic. And that happens a lot. So we'll get calls all the time. So try not to trap this time of year. I know it's hard if they're already in your attic, or if you can make sure that you talk to the pest control specialist and see if they can make sure that there aren't any babies in there, or if there's some way to get them out so that you're not trapping them inside the attic. That can make a really big difference. But just waiting until the end of fall, that's the best way, because other things can get trapped in your attic as well, which I'll talk about in just a minute. And then the other one that gets orphaned, just because they're prey species, are rabbits. So these can be also sometimes kidnapped, because people will find them in their yard and they're in this, like, rabbits dig this tiny little divot in the ground and they cover it up with grass. And the same thing with as the deer, the mom will go away and then come back and feed the young and then go away again, so that it doesn't smell a lot like baby bunny there. So people will accidentally, be digging in their yard and they'll dig up a rabbit and be like, oh no, there's a baby rabbit. It must need help. And so they'll take it away and bring it to the clinic when it doesn't really need help. But sometimes they do need help. For example, they're found by pets a lot. So a lot of times dogs will find it, or cats will find them in these tiny little holes. And if a cat bites any animal, not just a rabbit, but any animal, they have a lot of bacteria in their saliva, so they can really injure an animal if that animal gets bitten. So that's something that if the cat bites a wild baby, then you're probably going to bring it into the clinic. But the first thing that you should do is always just call, just to make sure, which is easy to do. They're very good at answering the phone and they have a lot of good advice. So these two are two that are really commonly orphaned animals. And then the other one is bats. So I had mentioned before that bats, another animal can get trapped in an attic, and that's bats. And bats right now are having their young. And so all the female bats, for big brown bats and little brown bats, they all gather together to have their young in what's called a maternity roost. And if you trap this time of year, you're going to trap bats in your attic, and you'll trap the little babies in there too. And so that's another one that you want to wait until the fall before you actually trap them out. But what can happen is sometimes if you do have bats in your attic, they can find their way into your house, or even if they're not in your attic, sometimes they might fly in through a window or get in through a small hole. They're can fit through teeny tiny little holes. So if you do happen to find a bat in your house, there's no need to panic, but you can call the Rhode Island Department of Health hotline and the Rabies hotline, which is right here. And you can also visit this page, which I'll post in the chat, which has some information about bats. So if someone has come in contact with a person or a pet, or if you're not sure if a bat has come in contact with a person or a pet, for example, if somebody was sleeping in the room, if there was a child in the room, if there was a pet, or someone who can't tell you that there's something wrong or that they were bitten, then you should absolutely call the Department of Health. If if you can't roll out the possibility of exposure. But if you see the bat actually fly in the window and you're able to get it out safely without touching it, then you know that it didn't bite someone because you saw it fly in. So just having a bat fly in your window, and if it flies back out, then perfect. Or if you can get it in a cardboard box and then put it outside and let it go without ever touching it, then you don't need to panic at all. But they can carry rabies. It's not very common. They tested, I think, how many bats was it, Mary? They tested, I think, 100 bats over each year over a 10-year period. Is that right, Mary? I think something like that.
So it's over a 10-year period. It's like maybe 4% of the bats tested positive, and they get a lot of bats because people find them dead, or this unfortunately happens, if they've got them, and then the control specialist comes and they end up by having to euthanize them. Every bat that ends up by coming out of someone's house that's euthanized or is found dead has to be tested. So it's actually a very low percentage. But it's of course you have to be cautious because it just takes that small percentage, and rabies is nothing to mess with. But for the most part, it's pretty low. So just seeing a bat also like in your yard is no cause.
Yeah, you don't need to call if there's a bat in your yard. Only if it's in the house and you're unsure if it bit somebody or touched somebody, or if you know that it did, then definitely call. But just seeing one and is not any cause for alarm. And like we said, it's a pretty low percentage of bats that have tested positive in Rhode Island, but still rabies is a very bad disease. So we want to make sure that everyone knows that if there's any chance at all that it has come into contact with someone, definitely call that number, or you can go on to that website that I posted in the chat, and it has a ton more information on it. But we love bats. So we don't want anyone to be scared of bats and think they all have rabies, because it's not true. All right, so I started talking about maternity roosts. So these are the places where all those bats gather together to have their young, and it's really amazing. There is this disease that it's a fungus that actually grows on the nose and wings of bats that they found in the past few years that's really impacted our bat populations, especially of little brown bats. And so those numbers have dropped. We still have maternity roosts in Rhode Island, and one of them is at our hatchery. And typically we do a bat night there, and we have everyone come out and help count bats, because that's one of our really cool opportunities that we have for volunteers. So what we do is you go out right around dusk, and you sit in a lawn chair and you watch the bats as they fly out of their maternity roost to go feed on insects. So we do it once in the beginning of the summer. So we watch all the moms fly out and catch bugs and then fly back in. And then we do it again in the end of the summer after the pups are born. So then we're watching the moms and the babies fly out, and we're counting them, so we know how many new young were born that year. And we do it every year to see how the populations are doing. And that's how we know that our populations have actually declined because of this white nose syndrome, that fungus that grows on the nose and the wings of bats. But on a positive note, we have seen some bats through other surveys that have had damage from white nose syndrome but survived. So we know some of them have survived having it. So hopefully they'll kind of build up a tolerance, but they're doing a ton of different tests to try to figure out if there is a way to combat this really, really bad disease that's impacting our bat species. So that's a really cool opportunity that's coming up. We don't have a ton of spots right now for this opportunity, just because COVID has kind of limited our numbers. But next year, keep an ear out, and hopefully we'll have more opportunities for bat volunteers. So we kind of touched already on rabies. So we know that bats can carry rabies, but also any mammal can carry rabies. So even a deer can have rabies, but there are certain animals that are more commonly carry it, and we call these rabies vector species. So they're all the ones that are listed here. So coyotes, foxes, raccoons, bats, woodchucks, skunks. So all of these can carry rabies. And the reason why I wanted to specifically point out these animals is not just to tell you all these animals have rabies. They don't all have it all the time. But if you ever directly handle a rabies vector species, touch it with your bare hands, then that animal immediately has to be put down. So it immediately has to be euthanized. So you can help, we can rescue these animals, but you never ever want to touch it with your hands because then it has to be tested for rabies, just as a human safety measure. So never directly handle any of these animals. And if you find one of these babies, definitely call the clinic first thing. So if you do have a scratch from any wild mammal, if it's what's considered a rabies vector species or not, it's still considered a potential exposure. So you still would want to call that number that we put on the bat slide and also reach out on that same web page. So just don't touch any of these animals with your bare hands. And you really don't want to be handling any wild animal because they're wild and you don't exactly know what they're going to do. So first things first is call. All right, so you might have some babies in your yard. So I know one of our seasonals a couple of years ago, I think this is her picture actually, she had these foxes that were denning underneath her shed. And she was happy to have them there and they weren't bothering her. But some people I know would rather not have a fox in their backyard, which is fine. But some things the reason why you might have these animals in your yard is because you might have what we call attractants. And those are things that all animals need, which are food, water, shelter, and then of course space, but there's plenty of space. So if you have any food, it might not be what you would think of as food for wildlife. So it might not be, mice, or it might not be groundhogs, but it could be uncovered compost piles or pet food left outside or uncovered garbage cans. And all of these things we found through a partner project with the Narragansett Bay Coyote Study attract coyotes and a lot of other wildlife because pretty much everything loves cat food. Like opossums will eat it, skunks will eat it, foxes will eat it. I know at the wildlife clinic, they feed some of the animals like kitten kibble because that's one of the things that has a lot of nutrition for them. So they're going to be drawn to it if they find that cat food left outside. So to try not to attract animals in a negative way, we don't want to accidentally feed them foods in our yard. So all of those things that I mentioned, try to take them away and remove those resources. And then the other thing is shelter. So like I said, these foxes were denning underneath her shed, but also den underneath decks that are raised up anywhere where there's that nice space underneath for them to hide. So you can kind of cover those up with hardwire cloth or mesh, wire mesh, and kind of dig it down into the ground so that the animals can't dig under it. So that's if you do not want these animals in your yard. If you do want them in your yard, you can give them some of their natural food resources. You can create brush piles because that's a natural habitat for them. And they also will kind of go under big rock piles. If you have any big rock piles, they like to go underneath there. So not necessarily trying to keep them out of your yard, but just not luring them in with things that they probably shouldn't be drawn to. So the other big one that we like to talk about is pets and wildlife. So a lot of people are concerned about their pets being attacked by wildlife, but sometimes pets can actually attack our local wildlife. And one of the biggest ones, like I mentioned before, is cats, and they can carry diseases. So we want to make sure that, if an animal does get harmed by a cat, that it's always, brought into the clinic for help. But we also want to make sure that we try to keep our pets inside. So cats, they're not a native species here. And I know, people have cats right now that are indoor outdoor cats. And they're like, I'm not going to keep my cat inside. It's used to going outside. And I completely get that. I'm not trying to force you to keep your cat inside that's used to going outside. But the idea of having your next cat be an indoor cat is a really great way to help wildlife because cats eat and kill a lot of our native species. So they'll eat things like our native small mammals, birds, reptiles, and amphibians. So we really want to try to keep our cats inside. Or you can, if you want to have them outside, you can have a catio, like one of those enclosed spaces for your cat. You can take them out on a leash. If you can somehow manage to train your cat to go on a leash, I know that's a bit of a stretch, but some people do. I think you have to start them young. So try to make your next cat an indoor cat if possible. We're kind of trying to slowly make that move because we know now that cats aren't good for the environment. So if we can try to move toward having indoor cats, then that's going to help our native species a lot. And I already mentioned bringing cat food in. That's a big one. And then just trying to reduce interactions between pets and wild animals. So bring pets in at night. Keep your pet on a leash. I know I just got 2 puppies. They're a handful, but I had them walking around my yard the other day on a leash. And good thing I did because they actually dug up a marbled salamander. And those guys aren't even supposed to come out until the fall. And so they started to dig, and I luckily saw it before they were able to get it. And I scooped it away and I put it back underneath the ground. But it's really important to monitor your pets if they're outside to know what they're doing. And then if you do happen to have any chickens, you want to make sure you keep them secure in coops and in an enclosed run. So I think that's about it for pets and wildlife. And I'm going to hand it over to Mary now because we've kind of given you a lot of information. So we want to kind of condense it into what's normal, when should I be concerned, and then we can kind of hand it over to Kristen to finish us off.
Yeah, so that's, like Gabby said, we just threw a ton of information. So let's kind of summarize in these next 2 slides. And also, we've been putting a lot of links in the chat and phone numbers and all sorts of stuff there. So tomorrow, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send out an email to everybody who attended and those who even signed up to who weren't able to attend, that we're going to have a whole list of the links that we have shared in the chat. So don't worry about I got to save all these links for later. So we'll have that all for you on one sheet. And we're also going to have a quick feedback survey. Well, I'm thinking of it now. We're going to have a quick feedback survey on this program, and also to capture some ideas of things that you would like to learn about in the future. Because these are, this is something that, comes up requested, all the time. So that's why we kind of decided to do it. So we'd love to hear from you, topics that you're interested in that you think need attention. So we're more than happy to get your feedback on that. Okay, so what is normal? So let's quickly review. So a fawn left alone in a safe space, totally fine. Mom's going to come back and tend to that baby. So just kind of observe and then leave. A feathered baby bird bouncing around on the ground. So that's a fledgling. So I have actually some turkey poults. These are our fledgling turkey poults. Fun factoid, turkeys can actually fly. So these little guys flap their way up onto this tree branch. So this, this is a perfect example of, a fledgling, not perfectly, kind of they're like in their awkward teenage phase, but perfectly fine. Mom will come and take care of them. Obviously, if they're not in a safe place, then we'll talk about what to do then. Baby bunnies hiding under the grass, that's natural for them. That's their natural camouflage. So you just can put that grass back and leave them alone. Baby animals playing with mom nearby, that's totally fine too. I've had like those little foxes under the shed. We had a litter of fox kits at my parents' house a number of years ago. And we could see them like running around and playing or whatever. So mom was nowhere to be found. So they're fine, just let them do their thing. And also seeing wild animals out during the day. So again, with those foxes, I used to, go and pick vegetables from the garden and everything. And you'd see the fox, at 3:00 in the afternoon, just sitting there watching you pick the vegetables, because they're just curious and hanging and probably waiting to maybe eat the vegetables too. Foxes are omnivores. So he's probably eating some of those raspberries and things there too. So if there's anything that's normal, the main action to take is to observe from a distance. So, things look good. Okay, I'll keep an eye out. If anything goes wrong, then I know to call the clinic. But for the most part, you can relax and just enjoy observing those animals in their natural state. So what's a cause for concern? So any baby animal left in a dangerous situation. So like on a road, if you're seeing anything on a road, definitely you need to figure out how to get it across. I apologize. The dog is squeaking her toy. Great timing, Zinnia. So any unfeathered baby birds on the ground. So this little guy right here, definitely helpless, definitely needs some help. Any baby out of a nest with eyes closed. That could be squirrels, that could be bunnies, and anything basically that should be in a nest and still has its eyes closed. It's very vulnerable. Any injured animal, any animal interacting with pets. So even if the pet didn't necessarily injure the animal. It's like Gabby had said, your cat could just take a little nip at something and could still infect that animal with the bacteria in their saliva. So that's just, obviously if the animal runs away, then you're not going to be able to do anything about it. But if you're able to help, you can. And any animal walking in circles, acting aggressive, looks sick, this is a huge concern. So most of these, I would say the action is to contact the wildlife clinic. For this last one, you can of course contact the wildlife clinic, but really this is a case for environmental police officers. Anything that could potentially have rabies. Another thing that we are concerned about here in Rhode Island that we monitor for constantly is chronic wasting disease in deer. So this does not transfer to humans. It just affects deer, moose, and elk. But basically, their brain tissue is attacked by a prion, and it just wastes away their whole body. They walk around, their heads down, they're lethargic, they look like they're just skin and bones. So this is something that is very, very concerning. We do not have it here in Rhode Island yet, but it is something that our deer biologist has an entire plan to monitor for it. So things like that, sick animals, really aggressive, that's something for law enforcement as well. And we will put that number in the chat and also on that resource sheet at the end.
I just stuck that number in the chat for everyone. And also kind of on that note of what you should do if for those species that are or situations when there's something that you should be concerned about. One thing that I did want to mention also is if you find a baby bird, find a baby bunny, find any kind of baby animal, you don't want to feed it. So some animals, if they're cold and you try to feed it, it can actually kill them or make them very, very sick. So if you find one, absolutely the first thing that you should do is call the wildlife clinic so that they can advise you on the next step. Because they might say, it needs to be warmed up, or they might say it needs, something else, or you need to bring it in. But whatever it is, the first thing that you should always do is call the clinic so they can give you the proper advice to go forward. And on that note, I think we will hand it over to Kristen for anything else that we missed. And if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat. And right here, you can see some of the information for the Wildlife Rehabilitators Association of Rhode Island. So contact information for them and an email and their website. And I'll also post that in the chat.
Hi. All right. Am I up there?
You're up.
Okay, great. Such good information. Thank you so much, Gabby and Mary, for that. What I thought I would do is just very briefly go over some of the most prevalent calls that we get, that people seem to run into problems more often than say other things. So I just figured I'd bring those handful of things up. But I first want to start by saying that if there's any wildlife situation or issue that's going on, we are always available for phone calls. So you can check in at the wildlife hotline, which I know is posted. That's the 294-6363. After 5 o'clock, we have someone that answers the phones till about 10 o'clock because we do need to sleep occasionally. But then we're certainly up first thing in the morning too. So we are generally always available to assist with any questions that anyone has. One of the things that was mentioned earlier that is something we deal with a lot is and has been gone over is if cats or dogs get a hold of any wild animal or bird, they really need to come in for rehab. Anything that a cat gets a hold of, even if it doesn't appear to be injured, still needs to come in. Because one tooth puncture in a small little body can, it's Pasteurella is the bacteria that we worry about, and that can pretty much run rampant through these little bodies and cause them to weaken and die after they're released. And also sometimes some injuries like internal damage aren't really visible. So you want to make certain that these animals are, checked over pretty well and put on antibiotics as they would need to once a cat or a dog gets a hold of them. Another thing that we always hear about, and right now it's happening, is bunnies, because they're in your yard, they're in your flower pots, they're in your garden. They nest in really unlikely places. One thing is you cannot relocate bunny nests. So if you find a bunny nest in your yard and you think it's in a questionable location, you cannot relocate that nest. So in the event that that's happening, I would call the wildlife clinic to determine exactly how you can handle this situation safely for everyone. There are lots of times bunnies will build nests in fenced-in yards where dogs are out during the day. And depending on the dog, sometimes we are able to keep the bunnies' nests there with some really simple methods. So again, call the wildlife clinic for any questions there. Baby birds, if you do find them on the ground, I would say if they're really, really young, you want to rewarm them before you put them in the nest, because when babies are out of a nest and down on the ground and they're really young, they don't thermoregulate, so they don't keep their body temps up, and they're very lethargic. And so what will happen, sorry, I've got the dogs going. Jake, can you stop them, please? Sorry about that. You're going to want to rewarm them so that they're up and gaping again. Otherwise, they just won't be warm enough to even react when mom shows up with food. But also always look for injuries first. So if there's any blood, or if one leg is obviously different than the other, they're just like us, both legs should look the same, or any heavy bruising, again, I would call for any assistance, and we're happy to help with that. Let's see, what else? Peaceful evacuations. At this time of year, I know that there was talk about squirrels. Squirrels and raccoons are the two big ones that will nest in sheds. Birds will as well. But in terms of mammals, sheds and attics, squirrels and raccoons, there are really easy ways of getting mom to just pack up her family and move them. And it's free, basically, or just a few dollars. And things like a radio being played with, like talk radio loudly, things like low containers of a rag soaked with ammonia, a few of those around, make it uncomfortable, and mom will just move her babies out. And then you wouldn't necessarily need to have pest control come in, because mom will move them to another site and she'll continue to raise her babies elsewhere. You cannot relocate any wild animal. So if an animal is removed from your attic by law, the pest control would have to euthanize those animals unless they can just release them in your yard, which most of the time you don't want to have happen unless you're ready to fix the area where, the animals are coming and going. So again, call on that. We can help you through that process as well. Any bat questions? I'm the person in the state that rehabs the bats currently. I'm always available for phone calls as well, and you can get my number through the 294-6363. The big thing with all of our rabies vector species is no skin to fur contact. So one of the issues that we see is baby raccoons are just so stinking cute, and people will come across them and they may be validly orphaned, and the ticket here is if anyone actually picks up a baby, skin to fur, we need to euthanize that baby to have them tested for rabies, because you have now exposed yourself possibly to rabies. Now, they may not have rabies, but there's only one way to find out. So the best thing to do is to call to find out what you need to do first. But certainly if they're in a bad spot, a box on its side, and push them in with a towel without really ever handling them is probably your best bet. Now you've got them safely contained, and you can call for assistance on that. So that's a big one. Keep in mind that we have the wildlife clinic that's located in Saunderstown or North Kingstown, right, and Route 1. But I also have a full network of trained and licensed home rehabilitators around the state. So regardless of where you live, there's probably a rehabilitator relatively close by, and we can certainly after hours or during the day refer you to someone who's relatively close to you. So again, never think twice about calling for information. Our website, which I know Gabby is making available to you, also has a lot of information on what you might do if you run into any specific species and you have questions. So the information may be there for you as well.
And yeah, and I also put a link to wildlifehelp.org, which is also a great resource that has a lot of those methods for peacefully removing wildlife, all those techniques that Kristen mentioned there, plus more. And I also put a link there to how to become a wildlife rehabilitator in case anyone is interested. You cannot rehabilitate a wild animal in the state unless you are licensed to do so and trained. And we do that in partnership with the Wildlife Clinic. So if you're interested, there's that sheet there and it'll tell you kind of step by step how to do it. And just like she said, there's a ton of people that are willing to help across the state. So if you ever need assistance, feel free to call. And if you have, a baby raccoon and you don't want to touch it, that's completely fine. We would say definitely call first and someone can probably come out and assist you with that. So we did just have one question that I see in the chat. Someone asked, should I wear gloves when rescuing a baby bird or animal so that your human smell won't be on it? So I don't know, Kristen, if you want to answer that.
Sure. I mean, for the sake of, baby birds are generally not an issue, and some of the baby mammals aren't either. Certainly you would wash your hands well after doing something like that, just like you should probably when you're playing with your cats and your dogs. So no, not necessarily. As far as birds, they do not have a sense of smell other than some of the vultures, because that's how they find their lunch. But birds don't have a sense of smell. We're a little more concerned when it comes to some of the mammals. And so we always suggest that someone puts gloves on and rubs their hand in the grass really well so that the gloves also smell like grass. And then if you need to handle them, that's one way of doing it. Certainly, if this animal is injured and needs to come into rehab, you don't have to worry about the human scent on them anymore. So that's the best way to handle that.
And I think that's just about all we have for you today. So thanks to the Clark Memorial Library. Thank you, Kristen, for coming out and the Wildlife Clinic for letting us have her for a few minutes. And I hope you all learned something today. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to Mary and I. You can reach out to Kristen. I put a link to our wildlife outreach page in the chat, and that has all of our other upcoming events. Next, we have a snake safari, and then we have a couple of other great fun programs. We have a whole wildlife Q&A program. So if you have any questions, then you can go to the outreach page and then submit your questions there so that we can kind of get some going ahead of time. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you for tuning in.